Thanks. So Eric and I are here to talk about networking. Now that you've learned everything about mentorship and how to find them and what to do with them and how to really nurture those relationships, we're going to talk about the steps that might come before that, all about networking. So a few things. Since it's just the two of us, you'll hear us go back and forth. We will cover a lot of things like why is mentorship important? How do you do it? And we're also going to share some of our experiences so that you can at least have a few different perspectives, because we totally believe that not everyone's styles are the same, and we want you to really own your own style of networking and what that might look like, and create space for that to evolve. So there might be moments where we don't where we have unique experiences. Okay, so with that being said, I'm Ariba Jahan. My pronouns she, her, hers, and I am the VP of Experience, Strategy, and Innovation at the Ad Council. Eric, what about you?
Yeah, thanks for having me. And of course, thanks to AIA for having me in the first summit. This is such an honor. I've loved working with Senna, Jesselyn, and Bernice on this so far, and so excited to be here today and talk to you all about my favorite topic, which is Networking 101. So I'm Eric Hu. I'm Principal Group Strategy Lead at Walmart. I've recently switched from about 8 or 9 years in the agency space over to client side. And a lot of the pivots I've had in my career are all thanks to networking. So really stoked to just impart some lived experiences with y'all.
Absolutely. So the big question of all, like, why are we even here to talk about networking? So according to the US Census Bureau, 84% of jobs are actually filled through networking. And then 70% of jobs are not even posted anywhere. So then how are we supposed to discover those opportunities or even get those roles, right? Eric, what do you think about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the first insight that I really just love sharing. So Reba, when you and I connected recently, the one thing we found common ground on immediately was we all had major success networking. And correct me if I'm wrong, but every single job in our combined resumes and tenures is all from networking, building community, and fostering just deeper connections than just service level ones. And it's propelled, at least my career, again, it's propelled so many pivots. And I can happily say, I've never had to trudge my way through an application process. And I really hope that after this, none of you will either.
Yeah. Do you want to share one of your most memorable networking experience?
Absolutely. Yeah. Thanks for asking. I think for me, it was really early, right? So in
Mhm.
college, I wanted to be a photographer. And at the time I was studying violin performance, which,
As
as
one
you can
does.
see, yeah, very useful for garnering an income and my career path. But I saw that this new camera dropped. It doesn't really matter which camera, but it was the world's smallest iPhone camera. It was $600, which now looking back, it's like a cool little toy. But at the time, $600 was like more than I had in my bank account. So I had this idea that what if I just go work for the company that created this camera? Right? Could I reach out to enough people on LinkedIn and figure out a way to get this camera for free? And in return, they own all the images I take. I'll do whatever they want, social media, community management. And I literally went down the list of every single person that worked in marketing at that company until someone was able to say, this guy's clearly interested, invested, energetic, passionate. Let's give him a chance. Let's talk to him. And from there, it grew into a 3-year-long relationship where I would go to B&H, this local camera store in New York City, and I would train their sales force on how to sell this camera. And I would go to Photo Plus Expo, which is like the auto show of cameras. And I would literally represent the company and stand there 8 hours a day and pitch my heart out to random passerbys on why this thing was going to change the landscape.
Wow.
Ultimately, it didn't, but that was my first experience networking, and it proved to me that you don't get what you don't ask for, and so a
Mhm.
lot of it comes down to get the courage to go out there and at least shoot your shot.
I love that. I feel like, I don't know if you've heard this phrase, but I heard this phrase back when I was an undergrad and I hated it back then, but now I really, really get it. It's closed mouth, don't get fed. So like if you don't
Yeah.
ask for the thing, you're not getting it. Like at least try, right? And speaking of pivots, I know that in our conversation, we talked about how networking impacted both of our journeys. And you're right. So um, I started in biomechanical engineering. So not exactly the most linear path, and that's okay. I feel like the more people nowadays are examples of that. There is no such thing, I think, these days of linearity. And I think there's a myth about it, like you're supposed to follow this track, and it does. I feel like at least in our cultures, those linear tracks are rewarded and perpetuated. So then you feel like, oh, I'm messing up because I'm not following that linear path. That's like a whole another conversation. But I'm saying that because those are the things that were holding me back from trying to not be on a linear path. And then, so I started in biomechanical engineering. I went into medical school and then pivoted my career completely into startups, products, and user experience. And now I run the innovation department of a nonprofit. All of that happened because of networking. I can sit here today in year 2022 and list those things, but like, it's not like back in whatever year that was, I said, this is what I'm going to do with my life. Like, no. And career pivots are ambiguous, they're frightening, and they're the most uncomfortable thing in the world, where you wake up every morning and you're like, what the am I doing with my life? And that's where networks really come through for you. So networking is what allowed me to do all of this, and maybe we'll get more into it as to how we did that. And then, so those are kind of like, I feel like our stories as to why we care so much about this. And I think, Eric, I would love to hear your perspective on this. Like I just shared one of the cultural norms that got in my way from even looking at networking or looking at like, how might I pivot, or pivot versus in our families, it's like failure, right? Like, come on. And that's like the other unlearning and relearning. I'm wondering from you, what are some cultural barriers that you think gets in the way of networking for our community?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad you're bringing this up because it's definitely something that I think is especially ingrained in Asian and Asian American households is this immigrant mentality of you put your head down, you work hard, and you'll succeed.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know that that's necessarily the case for a lot of people, right? And for me, I come from a family, similarly, family of engineers and scientists who don't really have the same kind of context that I do in marketing and product and strategy. Which is to say, my dad spent 25 years at the same lab. And that's awesome. That's really cool. But I look around and I'm thinking to myself, who has spent 25 years at an agency that I can name, right? I mean, maybe the guys that have their name on the door, but very typically the people that end up spending 25 years at an agency are either the founders or they come from a circumstance of privilege or just very different circumstances. And I think for me, the one barrier that I've used networking to overcome is this idea that it's not only okay, but it's great to be able to reach out and ask for help. And I think people always think of networking as, oh, I don't know if I'm wasting someone's time, or I don't know if they would want to talk to me. Like, why me? There's a lot of self-doubt. But the fact of the matter is, number one, look, people want to help, right? That's why there's so many people at the summit right now, is people want to know how to help one another and how to be there for one another's success and growth and trajectory. Number two, let's talk brass tacks. People benefit from helping you, right? And number one example I always bring up is back when I was at Havas, I swear at least half of my income came from referral bonuses. I loved meeting capable, brilliant, talented, especially junior talent, right? I want to be able to reach out and say, hey, look, I will let you pick my brain. And in exchange, I'm going to ask you a lot of questions of what is your vision? What is your goal? Where do you want to take your career? And might I be able to place you in this massive network that is constantly hiring? Because you know what? Every time I make a hire, I make $3,000. And I also look good because it shows that I'm tapped into a talent pool that is very different from people who are passive. So my biggest piece of advice, don't be passive, be aggressive, because everybody stands to gain. But Ariba, I'll throw that back to you. I'd love to hear about some of the social and cultural norms that you've been trying to break as a barrier of entry to networking.
So yeah, you hit on such a key one. And I think the other one that I'm constantly fighting is like I'm already thinking about like, how can I serve this other person? Like, why am I going to network with this person? And I think it's like you said, it's like understand that it's a relationship. It doesn't have to be so transactional, and it doesn't have to be so like perfect, right? And I think that brings up for me like the biggest myth that I had to unlearn, that there's like certain people that succeed in networking, and then there's like everyone else. And I feel like the biggest learning was like, no, that's not true. Networking is a muscle, right? Like it evolves with you, and there's going to be different strategies for different moments in your life, for different people you meet, and different and it also depends on like where you met them, what context did you meet them, and why are you asking to connect with them. So it's like, I think like the word networking is so heavy, and every time I see the word, I imagine like suit and tie, a white guy in a suit and tie, exchanging like shaking hands with another person like that, and it's not that. It's so much softer, and it's so much more bonding involved in it. So I think like that could be a great place to start the conversation about like, let's talk about the myth of there is no person that's supposed to succeed at networking versus like it's for all of us and it's really a muscle.
Absolutely. I mean, even before we dive into that, I went ahead and asked a few of my colleagues and friends and people just that inspired me in their career paths. And I wanted to share this quote that my friend Michelle Huang for Salesforce added. She said, offer to connect others wherever and however you can. Looking out for others helps spread good networking karma. That's big. And your friendships will strengthen with both parties as a result. And one thing that ties back to the conversation we're having right now is like, look, I mean, there's I agree. I mean, I think it was you, Lainey, in the chat saying, you know, networking doesn't have to be transactional. Sure, it doesn't have to be, right? Ideally, networking turns into a community building exercise where you're nurturing long-term invested two-sided relationships. They don't always turn out that way, and that's okay. And I think the conversation we're about to hedge ourselves into is this idea that, you know, do extroverts or a certain type of outspoken person do better in
Mm-hmm.
networking than people who are more reserved? And as a former, I always say that I'm a retired introvert turned extrovert is look, you could find your ways of becoming more extroverted in an industry that seems like it rewards people who are ready to go out there and meet new people and constantly talk. One of the tools and tips and tricks that I use is look, if you're an introvert and you get really drained really quickly from social interactions, pick a time and place that suits you. Networking doesn't
Mm-hmm.
have to be in a forum like this. It doesn't even have to be in a forum like a massive in-person conference or at a roundtable. It could be one-on-one. And actually, honestly, I love networking one-on-one because it immediately sets the table and the tone of I'm here to just learn from you. I want 30 minutes to really go deep on your experience and how I can learn from your lived experience. And I think that's really been key for me is figuring out, especially in a post-pandemic world, the opportunities are really limitless, right? Whereas it used to be, I live in New York City, so I go after New York talent and maybe I grab coffee with them, maybe I grab a beer or something like that. But today, I can reach out to someone in China, in India, in Europe, and I can say, listen, let's grab a time that works in your time zone, 15, 20, 30 minutes, and we'll just have a chat like this over Zoom. And it's opened up the world of opportunity where
Mm-hmm.
I don't feel drained because I'm sitting at home, I'm sipping my tea, sipping my coffee, I'm learning from someone. And similarly, they could just be walking their dog. They could be doing whatever. And there's so much freedom in being able to still connect while
Mm-hmm.
having this, you know, non-draining experience. So I'll pause there. I'd love to get your thoughts as well, Ariba.
I think that's a really key point, like how being in a post-pandemic, I mean, it's not even post yet, we're in the pandemic world where we're all in the same forum. So suddenly Zoom is where we're meeting. And also for someone like me, now I get captions everywhere. So I don't think I even got a chance to mention, I'm an immigrant Bangladeshi, and I have hearing loss. That means that when I have to go to a live event to meet people, I am immediately drained. I'm actually extroverted, but it's my hearing disability that limits my ability to process multiple voices at the same time. So like imagine going to South by Southwest and then you're at a mix and mingle and there's like tons of voices around you and you're really trying to make a meaningful connection. You know what's happening? Nothing. I'm not hearing crap. And then I feel the pressure of like, I'm supposed to make a meaningful connection, leave some sort of an impression so that you and I can connect over LinkedIn. And I can't hear anything, or I can't really process. What you can tell on the Zoom is that I'm also 4'11". So 4'11" and a ton of voices around me. That means I'm just like, can you just whisper into my ear really quick? And it doesn't work, So I think like thinking about, and that's why we want to talk about the fact that there is no specific individual that benefits or can do networking great. It's really the onus on us to design the networking experience that serves us, right? So whether you're neurodivergent, whether you have a physical or cognitive disability, like it's all about you, right? Like you can also have no disabilities and you're like, I just gave birth to a baby and I'm not going anywhere. So how can other people meet me where I am, right? So I think like talking about the fact that networking doesn't look like just live events where you're there. You can really think about how you can leverage networking in all these other spaces. Right in the last talk, Dan mentioned like, if you can leave this with 5 mentors, leave this with 5 connections, right? Like the AIA has enabled DMs. You can DM anybody here. You can DM me, you can DM Eric, and you can make a connection. I DM'd a few people in the day 1, and now I'm connected to them, right? So we're gonna talk more about like how to. Should we? Okay. Maybe we should jump into that. Let me see. So the other myth I think we wanted to talk about is when we should be networking. I feel like that is a good one to cover. There's this myth that networking, you should really network or like really invest heavily into networking when you're job hunting. Eric, what do you think about that?
Oh my goodness, no. I think you should always be networking. And I actually want to step away from the term networking for just one moment, which is ironic because
Yes.
it's literally called networking, right? 101. But I think if we step away from networking and we adopt the term, community building, right? Do you ever close yourself off to making new friends? Maybe, but probably not. Do you close yourself off to the idea of maybe finding love or whatever? Probably not, right? And so why would you ever close yourself off to finding a community or being a part of a community broader than yourself?
Mm-hmm.
So for me, networking is something that I like to do every day in a little bit of a way, right? And networking could look a little bit like engaging with someone that you've talked to in the past on LinkedIn, right? Liking a post, commenting on a post. It could be also a deeper connection. It could be DMing someone and saying, congratulations on the promotion I recently saw. Or, hey, do you have 15 minutes to catch up? I'd love to hear what's going on in your life. It doesn't always have to feel like, okay, I'm going to sit down and I want to go work at Droga. So I'm going to go look at art directors at Droga and hit up every single one. It doesn't have to be that aggressive. Exactly.
And it kind of shouldn't also.
Ooh, that's a good one. Yeah, maybe we should talk about that, like the do's and don'ts,
Okay,
like the faux pas.
Let's do it. What are some do's and don'ts that come to mind for you as it relates to networking?
Absolutely. I think one thing I've been toying around with, and I'd love to be proven wrong, which is don't be too pointed about what you're asking for. And I always tell people, don't ask for a job, try to ask for advice, right? When you sell someone so hard from the get-go, it almost seems too transactional, feels a little bit wrong. When I go to people, especially like CMO, C-suites, people who are more senior, more executive, it's intimidating. And I think right now in my career, I'm still very much intimidated of going after C-suite people because I'm like, oh man, am I wasting their time? Do I have thoughtful questions? But if you approach it from a standpoint of, look, I might want to work at your company, I might not. But I wanted to ask you, how did you get to the place that you are? And you're genuine with your curiosity. It opens up the door to a more honest, more heartfelt conversation. So one thing I always say is maybe don't lead with, hey, I really want a job on your team, at your company, like help me out here. It doesn't feel like you're giving them anything in return.
Yeah,
but
totally.
What about you?
I think another don't would be if you're doing a cold email, right? Be very intentional about like why you're reaching out, right? The reason being, we're in peak spamming. We're getting spammed in our IG DMs, in our emails, in our LinkedIn DMs. And even in LinkedIn, people are misleading in their connections. I don't know if you're experiencing this, Eric, where people are like, hey, I just want to connect with more women in innovation. I'm like, oh, amazing. And then I open, they're like selling me a product. I'm like, how do I unfriend you? Like, where's that button? So be really intentional and thoughtful as to why you're reaching out, right? And so there might be people that you're like, hey, this is a CEO and I really want to like be in their ethos. Start by following them. Whether you're following them on LinkedIn or you're following them on IG or, on Twitter, and like engage with them. You don't always have to, I guess, like DM them per se, right? You can engage with them and have a conversation with them. And if that conversation goes further, sure, then that can transfer into DMs, right? That's been my success in terms of like when I'm thinking about the type of person I'm engaging with versus if you're at an event like this where some of the CEOs have been on stage, right? That is your plug as to why you can reach out to them, right? If they are openly saying, hey, connect with me on LinkedIn, connect with me, etc., do it. And your first thing, and if you're gonna connect, make sure you add a note and say, hey, really inspired by your talk at AIA, and maybe add in what was the inspiring part and connect with them, right? So look for a mutual interest or a mutual point of connection to help drive that connection, because we're at peak spam right now.
Yes, absolutely. I'm so glad you brought that up. One thing I've learned really early on in networking, especially when I was in college, one of the things that you have as a student is this idea of like free time, right? And I've had less and less of it as the years progressed. But in college, I had plenty of free time, and my friends were off partying and making friends, and I was in my dorm room researching my favorite ads. But the good thing about researching your favorite ads, your favorite campaigns, your favorite spots, and this is rather niche, but I think the example works for other industries as well, is I got to know the industry very well, very quickly. What shops are making what kind of work. And then when you reach out to people at the shops that you want to work at or intern at, now instead of saying, hey, I'm Eric, I'm in college, I want to network with you, it's, hey, I really loved this ad, especially this insight that was probably backing this ad. And then you can kick off the informational session with, look, I gathered my resources, I gathered my knowledge, I took the time to invest in something that you may have been a part of. And there have been so many cold calls where people will come back and say, I really appreciate it. I was nowhere near that piece of work, but hey, at least you took the time to learn a little bit about the agency. Why don't I sell you on what I do? Why don't I sell you on my client? And maybe, who knows, maybe you're working with me someday. And I found that to be very, very useful, is how can you present yourself as relevant even before you start to drive those connections in the situation of networking?
Absolutely. I think this could be a good moment to talk about like what are all the spaces networking truly happens, right? So we've already talked about LinkedIn, LinkedIn follow versus LinkedIn DMs, Zoom is the new place. What else do you want to add to that list, Eric?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is actually something that David Ty dropped in the chat. If you guys want to scroll back up to 2:16 p.m., he said it, Lunch Club is a great resource, right? And places like Lunch Club are awesome if you happen to be in the same geography as your peers, because it actually brings people together without having to do that whole awkward cold calling thing that might get in the way. So if you like something with a low barrier of entry, I highly recommend you check it out. So, David, thanks for dropping that. I think for me, another way that it happens is, look around you right now. Chances are you have a rich community already, right? If you've lived in an area for at least a year, you probably have a friend or two. Leverage that friendship. So something I love to do is called second degree dinners. So I usually find a friend that I'm very close with, intimate with, and I probably have had very interesting conversations with. And I think back to our conversations and I try to pick a topic that's loosely interesting in a career sense, right? And let's say, Ariba, you and I were great friends for a number of years, right? And we want to host this dinner together. You would invite a friend that I don't know. I would invite a friend that you don't know. And those friends would invite one more person that neither of us know. And going back to this conversation of extroversion versus introversion, it helps because it always feels pretty intimate, right? You always have that one friend at the table that you could rely on. We've all been to those house parties where you're like, oh man, 30 new people. I don't know if I'm going to make any friends. I don't know if I'm feeling it tonight. but you have that one anchor friend that makes you feel really confident because, you know, at the end of the night, if you're not picking up any interesting conversations, you could always go back to that friend. So it's quite nice. And something else I like to do at these dinners is I like to create a little bit of a preparation, right? And by that, I mean, you pick a topic that you think is broad enough for everyone to care about. You sprinkle in a few bullet points of, hey, here's maybe a news article, maybe here's a blog post about it. So everyone can read a little bit about it and form their own POV and come to the table ready to explore and discuss. And that concept is called the Jeffersonian dinner. If you guys haven't heard of it, I highly encourage you to look into it. But this is just a long, elaborate way of saying, look, a networking event or networking doesn't have to be for the sole purpose of what can you give me, what can I give you? It could be also about building a relationship, building a friendship around either shared values, shared interests, or just a topic of conversation that might propel you forward as you guys live parallel lives.
I'm so glad you said that. And that also supports the thing that we said about like, you don't need to network only when you're job hunting, right? So I feel like this is such a great opportunity to redefine the word networking and really think about like just forming meaningful connections, whether that meaningful connection is because you just discovered you both play the violin at a second degree. Did you say second degree or third degree dinner?
Second degree dinner. Third degree birth, dinner. Second degree dinner.
Ouch. So it doesn't have to be about just like your functional role. So if you're a product manager, you shouldn't just be networking with just product managers, right? Like we're here to form meaningful connections. And if you think about like the community aspect, that's what it's about. How can we nurture each other, right? And how can we support each other and uplift each other? So, if you, what was I going to say? Okay, I lost my train of thought. So we're gonna keep.
Wait, I have something I definitely want to jump in there with. So this is another anecdote, but my friend Maggie, who is right now a VP of Experience at McCann, recently sent this quote to me out of nowhere. And I love Maggie. She's one of my closest friends, and we've been bickering ever since we've met like 4 years ago, and we just disagree about everything. But you know what's beautiful about that experience, and it's relevant exactly to what you're saying, Ariba, is look for people who disagree with you, right? She actually says, seek out people who disagree with you, who are different from you, who work in different industries. And I think right now more than ever, I mean, I look around and everything's polarizing, right? Everything is a headline. And in a world of headlines, something has to be in the fine print. And so a lot of what I do is I try to find people who work in different departments, different industries entirely.
Yes.
Is one of the things that I try to do as a strategist is I connect the dots in the world. And those dots often have nothing to do with each other. But if you could form that seamless connection, you're almost driving a story that's already half written. And it's the same thing in networking where you get stronger and faster and more efficient and better at networking community building when you actually reach out to people who do not think the way you do or have totally different lived experiences, because it just makes you more relatable and helps you relate to others better. And the last thing I'll say about that is I think we all want to be better at empathizing and sympathizing, right? And those two are quite different and nuanced. But I think in networking, one of the things that's I'm always looking out for is how can I help someone not just today or tomorrow, but in the long term? And so one of the things I want to bring up in terms of networking is make your vision very clear if you have one, right? Okay. And this goes back to do's and don'ts.
Say more about that.
Absolutely. So I think for me, I can't sit still. And I remember I had a conversation with Bernice where she was like, this is probably why I'm a creative, because, you know, sitting still is hard, right? And picking one vertical or picking one lane for people who just like to explore it doesn't come naturally to us. And that's okay. But I think there's a lot that drives us as professionals, as career-oriented people, perhaps. And, you know, I want to dare and venture to say everyone on this call is probably career-oriented in some way, right? You care enough to be here right now. And I'm sure that you've thought a little bit about where do I see myself in 5, 10, 15, 20 years? And you may not have a clear idea of what that role might be. You might not have a clear idea of, you know, are you going to be a manager or an individual contributor? But you probably have an idea of what fuels you, what makes you feel good when you show up to work or you show up anywhere, right? And making that clear and sharing it with other people in a casual or networking presence helps them help you in the long term, right? It keeps you top of mind. I think someone dropped that in the chat earlier. It keeps you top of mind, and not just you, but what your goals are and what you're looking for. And it helps them introduce you to more people like that so that you can all grow together. So I want to pause there and see if any of that resonates with you, Ariba, because I'm going to rant all day.
No, it so does. I think like immediately I thought about like one thing is like, if you have a vision, hang on to that and make sure you're sharing it at a very like at the right moment. And what I mean by that is like in that cold email where this person has no idea who you are, don't drop in your vision for the world at that moment. But like when you have when you're having a conversation, right? Like right now, Eric and I are having a conversation. It's just you are all part of it. So right now, Eric can share his vision with me, and I would receive it, and I would make that note in my head and be like, okay, Eric's vision is this. How can I, Ariba, support his vision? Right? That's why you want to share that. Some of the other places networking does happen is, so we talked about all the DMs, also threads and posts, right? So suppose you follow your idols or people's perspectives that you're curious about, right? I don't really believe in idolizing, so I'm trying to reframe that word myself. So and they post something and you're like, wow, that's a great article. Don't just read it, feel free to engage with it. And maybe you're like, well, that's too much for me. Start by liking it. And then maybe like the third time you can leave a comment. So it's give yourself the permission to engage on threads and posts and forums so that you can just have a dialogue, right? And the dialogue will start showing like, oh wow, like maybe that's how I could have discovered Eric. And like, oh wow, like this guy from Walmart Labs has like a very unique perspective. I'm really curious about what he does. Hey Eric, blah blah blah, right? Like, and I'll say like, hey Eric, really appreciated your comment on that post, and like, would you be open to chatting sometime, right? So I think the other thing I'd love to dive into, Eric, is like the crafting of the message. And I know the message really varies depending on whether it's an email, a DM, and all the things. So why don't we dig into that?
Absolutely. There's such a codified approach to networking that I love. And so many people have like a formula that works for them. I have an example of exactly what you're just talking about. Maybe can I share my screen? Is that possible? I cannot.
I think so.
It's okay.
Oh, what do you, I think I can.
Oh, there we go.
Oh, there you go.
Can everyone see this?
No.
Oh, no.
Did you select like a very thin part of your screen?
Yeah, I'm thinking here we are. I want to share this, and he gave me permission, so I'm not invading anyone's privacy. Hopefully he's on this call. I see a lot of familiar faces on this call, actually. So maybe he's on, maybe he's not. His name's Ian. He reached out to me a long, long time ago. And I want to call him a friend now. And he's been someone that's been very active in the community. We met on Natalie Kim's We Are Next, Coffee at a Distance. And since then, I've been really curious about how he goes about networking. This is something that I really love about the way Ian approaches it. First of all, he's got a method, right? If you look at this Excel spreadsheet, he's got when he's connected with you, he's got who he's connected with. Again, What is their vision? What are their pain points? Guys, I can't be a fraud here. I gotta say, I don't have an approach like this, right? So I'm taking this advice myself. Be like Ian, be really meticulous, create that spreadsheet and really keep track, because man, this guy is really able to follow up with people in a meaningful way. And not only that, but I see him actually tagging other people in the community, right? Like I see, like, for example, the screenshot, proactive engagement, right? He says, let it be known she's not like other motion designers, she's different. That's him talking about someone else he's networked with on a public forum on LinkedIn. And I see that happening. I'm like, man, Ian's really got the right idea. Another way I see this happening is, this is Winnie. Winnie's a great example of how to network in a meaningful way on a personal note, right? So whereas Ian was really mastering this public-facing kind of community gathering mode of networking.
Are you able to zoom in a little on your slides?
Sorry, I got like a 34-inch monitor, so. But Winnie here.
Is that helpful, Hannah? Okay, awesome. Keep going.
Perfect. Yeah, if you look at the way that Winnie's writing these, I mean, you don't have to actually go into the copy too much, but she reaches out on January 29th. And then nearly a month later, she's checking back in and she's like, hey, just making sure we got this calendar invite. Are we still on? And then she's checking in after and she's saying, hey, I remember that conversation we had, and there was this one thing you brought up. Let's talk about it again. And she does that over and over and over. And I think that follow through, that rapport We always talk about rapport in sales, right? How can you build that long-lasting relationship that stays top of mind, that stays relevant? That's something that I'm really curious about, is how do other people do this? Because I've seen these two approaches here. I know my own approach in crafting my own messages and staying top of mind, but I'm always really interested in how are people finding new ways of doing this, because these examples stay with me and live in my head rent free. And I try to live by Winnie and Ian's examples every single day because it works.
So those are such great examples, and I think I'm glad you share them because they're so different from each other. And I
Yes.
want everyone who's tuning in to own that permission to create your own way, right? Take tools and advices. I mean, this is day 2 of an incredible summit filled with advice, filled with tips and tools. Pack them all up, put them in your pocket, and then take out the ones you want to experiment with, right? And there's going to be moments in your life where you're like, I can't right now. And that's okay. But take out the ones when the time is right that you want to tinker with that. Maybe you saw that spreadsheet and you're like, boom, I'm on it. Maybe you saw that spreadsheet and we're like, I'm going to go to bed now. So whichever is you, give yourself the permission to be the you that you need to be, right? Take these little things and serve yourself. I think the thing that Winnie's approach made me think about is like something else to be mindful of in this era of like over exhaustion, burnout, is if you have a meeting coming up, I like to sometimes like do what Winnie did and say like, hey, is this still a good time? But I also in that email give people an out, but I give it in a way where it's like, hey, I know we're at peak burnout and we're still in a pandemic. If this time no longer serves you, I'd be happy to connect at a time that works for you. So I'm not saying let's never meet again, but I'm letting them know that their feelings are real and it's not about it just being service to me, but both of us, right? So that's something to be mindful of. So speaking of that, now I want to talk about the availabilities, the coordination time. So Eric and I, when we were prepping for this call, we talked about Calendly, a tool. I'm not so sure if everyone is familiar with the tool, but Calendly is a tool, so a web-based tool that allows you to kind of create slots for other people to book time on your calendar. Um, and so what happens often is when you're coordinating and instead of saying, hey, what times are you free? Here's when I'm free. Some people just send their link. So Eric and I went through a conversation of when it's appropriate to share it. What is that right moment? And it's interesting how much the nuances matter, right? Eric, do you want to share a bit about some of the thoughts we shared?
Absolutely. I really appreciate, and I find people more memorable when they go out of their way to make networking easier for me, right?
Mhm.
And I'm speaking from a case of I am the one receiving the networking invite or request. So from that standpoint, what's really, really helpful is when people take the time to say, look, I know you're busy. I'm going to carve out the 15 to 30 minutes. What times are you available? I can go schedule it. If you're using a tool like Calendly, that's great too. But I never, ever, ever want to hear the words, hey, I want to pick your brain. By the way, here's my Calendly link. It feels a little off. It feels a little weird. And I know I'm being nitpicky here, but those things matter because you never know what battles are going on in the other person's life, right? So make it easy for them. Instead of saying, here's my Calendly link, it's, do you have any preferences time of day? By the way, if it's easier, here's my Calendly link if you want to just go in a select time. If not, totally cool, we can coordinate, right? And I think just that little nuance there really
Mhm.
changes the tenor of conversation because you're asking for help, you're asking for advice, you might as well ask, what can I do to make this easier for you?
So notice uh, the the events here. So first is the asking of like, hey, can we connect? Waiting for the person to say yes to then
Yes.
send Calendly. Not like, hey, I want to connect, here's my Calendly, right? Then all the burden just fell on the other person where they don't actually get to opt out of engaging with you. So this actually makes me think about what I've been doing on Twitter DMs these days. There are individuals that I just connect with and I just feel like, hey, we're vibing a lot on the same threads. I would love to get to know you, but I frame it as a, hi, I noticed that we are often on the same threads. Would love to connect with you in the season that feels right for you. And what they immediately tell me is like, oh, amazing, thank you so much. Could we reconnect in August? Because I already know people are at peak burnout right now and peak like all the things. So Eric, I'm looking at the questions that are coming in from the crowd here. So one question is, how do you keep your network active and alive? And not alive, live. They are already alive.
Ideally, yeah,
Yes.
that'd be great. Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think I think we've covered a little bit before, right? Like really making sure that you're on LinkedIn, liking their posts, commenting, DMing. But I think there's something that media studies nerd moment for those of you guys who have read Marshall McLuhan, right? The medium is a message. I think that's a very popular phrase that's going around. One of the things that I think about often is media hopping. And I don't want to coin a term here. That's not what I'm doing. It's just a concept that I'm playing around with, which is, look, if you follow someone on LinkedIn and you've been following them for a year and you've had a great rapport, maybe you talked to them a couple of times and they at least know your name and face, go and find them on Instagram, go and find them on Twitter, see where else they might be posting. And, obviously don't go around following people's Finsta. That's personal. That's weird. But if you see that they're on Twitter because they're really interested in, sharing thoughtful nuggets and insights, that's a great place to stay relevant and say, hey, I exist in this space too. Remember me? And I think that's a great way of just reaching out to people in a meaningful way, building that element of surprise that makes you just a little bit stickier than someone else that is only one channel and channel agnostic, right? So I think that's definitely like my top tip for keeping your network live and alive.
I think the other great thing about the advice you just gave is it lowers the barrier to the types of conversations you have to find with this other person, right? Like, so if I'm connected with Eric on LinkedIn and I'm like, I ain't got no like product related questions to ask him, but then I found him on Instagram and then he posts a photo of something that's interesting to me. Maybe he goes on a hike and I'm like, oh my God, that view is incredible, right? That just lowered my barrier of staying connected with him. And now it also let him feel like, oh, okay, I don't always have to talk about products in order to engage with Ariba, right? Like we're multifaceted human beings, right? And the power of networking or having and forming these connections, it allows you the gateway to discover how multifaceted others are, and it allows you to share the multifaceted that you have, right? So explore that.
Yeah.
Okay. Moving on to the next question. Ooh, this is a really good question. Have you ever removed someone problematic from your network? And there's a follow-up. Did you approach them before or just block them?
That's a really tricky one. I don't know that I have, but here's what I can share. Look, you don't always have great networking sessions, right? Once in a while, you're just going to meet someone that you're not clicking with. Maybe they're having a bad day. Maybe you're having an off day. I would always say this, look, networking is it can be a total crapshoot. You can't guarantee you're going to learn something. You can't guarantee that there's going to be a positive outcome, but the best thing you could do is keep trying. And I would say a good, healthy mindset to community building is to build that momentum. And momentum is great because you're always going to walk away from every conversation gaining at least something. And that something could be resilience and saying, look, maybe that was a total 30 minutes, but how many 30-minute segments do I have in a week? Probably a lot, right? And if you aggregate that across a year or 5 years, the number of conversations that are meaningful, the connections that you build that are meaningful are going to far outweigh those that may not be. And so I would say treat networking and community building as an exercise of just being vulnerable. To your point, Ariba, allowing yourself to show up as a multifaceted being and seeing what sticks out there. You're only going to get sharper at what works for you and what doesn't, who you're going to connect with and who you might not. And as you discover this about yourself, it actually helps you in other verticals that are very career oriented as well. And a great example of that is interviewing, which is another passion point of mine. I love interviewing strategies. I'll leave that for another day. But look, interviewing is just as much about figuring out if you're a right fit for their place as much as if your employer is a good fit for you. And that's the same thing as networking, which is are these kinds of people a good fit for me? And is my energy a good fit for this kind of community?
Totally. I think what I'll add here is I don't know how the question asker is defining problematic. So, so boundaries come to mind for me when I hear that question, and problematic if there is someone, whether they're in my feed in some way or I'm connected to them, and the things that they're sharing is not about like polarizing view, but literally I feel like my well-being and my rights are in question, then perhaps I might unfollow or unfriend, and I own that. I own that right? Because I get to curate my digital experience, my digital garden, right? And the other thing is, I think I saw Susie talk about like salesy people. I've had that where someone said, like I mentioned, like, oh, I want to connect to more women in innovation or product. And then I connect, and then like I'm getting a ton of sales things. I actually said, hey, I have to say your original request to connect really inspired me. And I wanted to connect because I also want to connect with other women in product. However, your follow-up messages are misleading to your first or not aligned with what you said. So I feel a little misled in this connection right now, right? And of course it got awkward. You see the little, you see the green bar on LinkedIn where she's there, she's reading it, but she's not responding. And I'm comfortable with that because I feel like my boundary has been crossed where you are implying one thing when you're connecting and then doing something else. So then I said that and said, hey, I'm going to disconnect right now, but if at a later time you do want to connect on more of a women in product conversation, happy to engage. And I disconnected. So remember, your network, you get to curate that network. So be mindful of, I guess, what your boundaries are. And some boundaries could be like black and white, like, these are very hard boundaries for me, versus what are some softer boundaries where you may mute someone for now and then bring them back, right? So like play around with those. That's really been helpful for me. Okay. Oh, wrong doc. Questions. What is a good way to reboot a network connection that has been disconnected or spotty? I feel like you covered that in the first question when I asked you about how to keep the network active and live, but does the rebooting the network bring something else to mind for you, Eric?
No, I mean, I would say, look, the best case scenario is you never have to reboot anything because you've stayed on top of it. But as someone who does not stay on top of networking 100% of the time, because we're all fallible, I would say the best way to keep in touch is to just keep in touch, right? And nobody's ever going to blame you for falling off for a few months or a few years or what have you, right? Careers are long, right? And if you weren't too memorable to begin with, it's never too late to start now, right? And I would say people always appreciate hearing from you because it just means that you remembered, right? And I would just keep that in mind, say, look, you fell off with someone, that's okay. At least reach out and say, look, I'm sorry I haven't been in touch more often, but I'm back, I'm here, I want to reconnect, let's do this. One thing I wanted to touch on from the last conversation, because I really want to hit this home, because weirdly enough, I've been on the receiving end. Have I ever, disconnected with someone? Let's say LinkedIn is not a dating tool. It is not a dating platform. Please, guys, please do not use LinkedIn to go find a date. That is not how this works. I just need to say that because it's so weird when I see that happen. Just not the right forum. Yeah, right.
Oh, yeah. When we talk about salesy, that is like the peak right there. Yes, that's right. That's right. We are very glad that you feel this way. In terms of, I like what you talked about when you said, it's okay, like if something kind of becomes idle. If you think about like burners, for instance, right? Like you have your front burners, you got your back burners, and then like maybe it's something that's not even on a burner. It's okay if in your network you've got some people that are kind of on the front burner right now because you're having a conversation, you're engaged, and then there are people that are sitting on your back burner. That's okay. And then there are people that you're like, sorry, where did we connect? How did we like, and that's okay too. And I think, Eric, you made a great point about like it's okay if like people rotate on your burners kind of thing, right? Like you don't have to keep the same people on your front burner. That's like draining for both parties involved,
Yes.
and friendships and relationships all evolve. So that really is another thing to keep in mind. So I'm coming back from mat leave. I birthed it. I was trying to think of the right wording. I birthed a baby, really cute baby boy, back in December, well, November 30th, and maybe I was pretty sick during my whole pregnancy, so I could not keep up with conversations. And this day and age, I don't know, Eric, if you feel this, I can't tell if a conversation was in Slack, on Twitter, like I don't know where things are happening. And I feel this immense pressure to like keep track of them. And I'm like, sorry, I just can't. I just can't. So I give myself the permission to not keep up with all the different channels and all the different conversations. And like Eric said, like you can come back to a conversation, right? Like there's one person where I have a conversation with her in Slack, in Twitter DM and IG DM. And I literally came back to her and was like, I know. Can like I'm back now, sort of. I'm easing back from mat leave. Could we connect in June? So the other thing, so I'm letting her know I'm back, that I'm aware that we have some threads happening, but I'm also not saying let's get together like tomorrow, right? Like I don't need that pressure. So I'm like, what about June? June feels good, so that's another way to keep in mind, like that happens to people, right? Seasons. Trying to see if
Absolutely.
are there any more questions? Oh,
Well, one thing I would add to that, first of all, I mean, Ariba, happy, yes, I think someone mentioned it, Crystal mentioned this, happy first Mother's Day. Congratulations.
thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, of course. I think one thing that I learned from the strategy world very quickly is when clients ask you, what is the ROI on marketing and advertising? It's always a tough one, right? And one thing I always say is, look, marketing might not have an immediate ROI, but it holds you over for the time in between product launches and product innovations. That is a very standard canned response. Same thing with networking. Every time you do something, it holds you over until the next conversation. And networking doesn't have to just be the moments that you're sharing a space together live. It could be engaging with posts. It could be digital. It could be in person. It could be over the phone, what have you, right? There have been cases in networking where I've actually received handwritten notes or something in the mail. That's pretty far along with the whole social onion theory, right? Like you've peeled back a lot of layers for me to provide you with an address. But short of that, I think about it from a proactive and a reactive standpoint, right? There's networking from a standpoint of you're reaching out to someone or you're engaging with their content or you're DMing them. But there's also I see a lot of people posting, I networked with someone and this is what I learned. I'm going to share this with people. And you're not necessarily reaching out to the person that you networked with, but if and when they see that post, they're going to go, wow, that person really took our conversation to heart. This person is clearly taking something we've shared, a moment, an insight, a goal, and they've taken it and ran with it. And I think that's just as impactful and meaningful because it actually shows that you're listening, you're paying attention, this idea of active listening. So I want to challenge everyone to think about how they can start doing that as well. Is the proactive outreach very important, but also the reactive way of showing that you've actually taken their advice or you've taken those learnings and did something with it.
I love that. I feel like that really echoes some of the things that they talked about in the last session about mentoring. So last question, and then we'll close out. As someone early in their career, I'm not always sure how I can be useful to those who reach out to me to connect and have a chat.
Can you repeat that one more time?
Yep, sure. As someone early in my career, I'm not always sure how I can be useful to those who reach out to me to connect and have a chat.
Wow. Whoever asked that question, please reach out to me because I have so many thoughts on this one specific question. But I actually don't think C-suite executives are the most useful for networking. I actually think that junior talent is often the most valuable in terms of giving back to the community. And why is that? The hardest job you'll ever find, and this is just my opinion, so don't take notes on this one, but I think the hardest job in the world is the first one. Take the notes. The hardest one truly is getting through the barrier, proving to the workforce that you are capable of holding down a full-time job. I spend far more time networking my way into my junior strategy role than I am networking my way into Walmart, for example, right? And when I think back to what I had to offer as a junior strategist all the way through a senior strategist, all of that was golden insights on how to get your foot in the door, which is, again, the hardest obstacle, at least in my journey, right? So when I listen to podcasts with junior talent, when I get reached out to by junior talent who's like, hey, I want to share these insights, are these valuable? The answer is always yes, because
Yes.
you are living what the next generation is about to go through. So I actually think you are the best candidate to be sharing information. You are living it. You are literally living the dream.
I love that. And I think this goes back to a question that was asked in the last session too. Like, can you be a mentor and a mentee at the same time? Hell yes. Because wherever you are, you have more position of power than somebody else. And wherever you are, you have something that you've learned from someone else that you can give and share to somebody else. And wherever you are, you can always ask for help and ask for guidance, right? So wherever you are, just know that you can give, share, and have that meaningful exchange. So you can be a mentor and mentee at the same time. You can advocate and be a sponsor to somebody else in a project. You can share your perspective and go into a conversation and know that you have something of value to share. With that being said, feel free to connect with us. We are on all the things. Like Liz shared, there is a digital guide that is stellar, beauty, and thorough in terms of content, and we're always around. All right, Eric, thank you so much for this amazing conversation. Bernice, Jocelyn, and the whole squad, thank you for having us, and thank you everyone for paying attention and asking such thoughtful questions.
Yes. Thank you, everyone. And thanks for AIA for having me. I'll sign off with this one last part. I have 100% coffee chat guarantee. I always say it. Anyone who reaches out to me, I will say hello, and I would love to get to know you guys. So please don't be shy. Reach out to myself, and I'll even volunteer Ariba here. Reach out to us on LinkedIn and say hello.
Yes. I was just going to drop it in the chat, like connect with me too. All right. Thanks, y'all.